Did I get it wrong? Welcome to American Esoterica. If history class gives you the misprinted front page headline, this is the correction in small print on page 7 the next day. The essential stuff in between. The personalities, events, and other ephemera that shape our history and culture. I'm Brian Powers. For 2 years now, as of the date of this episode, I've been asking if I got it wrong. That's because of the very nature of armchair historical research, which might mean that I'm dealing with several conflicting accounts from respected secondary sources with no primary source to separate the fact from the fiction. For instance, in the recent episode about Abby Smith and her cows, there weren't too many secondary sources, and the ones that did exist all had contradictory sets of facts. Luckily, in that case, there was a primary source in the form of Julia Smith's Compendium of the Ordeal, and even that had some contradiction in it. It's harder when there's no primary source to review to correct the record. Then, you either have to choose which source you believe or omit all the things contradictory just to be on the safe side. Often, you can tell when one secondary source has clearly cribbed from another because the wrong facts will get handed down in exactly the same way. And then that makes it easy who to weed out. But just the same, the search for historical fact is not always a clear path. Take, for instance, the very second episode about the first president. I had the name of John Hanson on my lips for years. But when I did my research, it seemed obvious, and the opinion of many respected sources, that the title should be Samuel Huntington's to have, and that's who I went with. Funny thing, though, since that episode premiered, John Hanson's name keeps popping up as the first president of the United States in Congress assembled. Did I really get it wrong? Well, it turns out, no. See, until 2015, John Hanson was considered by the federal government to be the first president under the Articles of Confederation. In 2015, however, the National Archives and Smithsonian Institution formally recognized Samuel Huntington as the first president, finally putting it to bed for all time. John Hanson remains the first elected president under the Articles of Confederation, however. It took 240 years for us to even figure out who the president was under the Articles of Confederation. Holy cow, were those things sloppy. So after 2 years of trying to get my facts straight, there are a few that still may have been shined on a little more than I care for. And there may have been some subjects that have received my editorial thumb on the scale for narrative effect, even when it defies the nuanced view that I so desperately wish to provide. When that happens, well, sometimes it's best to turn to those who know a little bit more about the subject than me. So with me today is Stuart Fisk Johnson, Esquire, who is the President General and Treasurer of the Aaron Burr Association, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to educating the public about the life and true legacy of Aaron Burr. Stuart is an 11th generation member of the Fairfield, Connecticut branch of the Burr family in America, to which Aaron Burr belonged. He's played David Hossick, MD, in the 2004 dual reenactment Weehawken. Dr. Hossick was the Hamilton family doctor who tended the wounds of both Alexander Hamilton and his son Philip after their fatal duels. Stuart was born in Suffern, New York, received his law degree from the University of Virginia Law School, served as a congressional intern under John Dean, and attended the Woodstock Music Festival in August of 1969. Stuart practices criminal defense law in D.C., and he served as court-appointed counsel for John Hinckley Jr. for 4 days. So, Mr. Johnson, in episode 47, Hamilton 2 Burr Boogaloo, I portrayed Aaron Burr as maybe, let's say, a few fish short of a school. He is a treasonous charlatan, sir. Someone who committed treason by trying to steal an army and set up his own country and swindled this poor older woman out of her real estate and property and wealth. So the question I have for you about Aaron Burr is this. Did I get it wrong?
Well, it's an exaggeration, but let me say this. As far as the Southwest adventure that eventually got Burr arrested on the directive of President Thomas Jefferson, as you know, was found not guilty by a jury in Richmond in 1807. The jury verdict, which we have seen, our association has seen the original verdict.
Oh, wow.
In Richmond, in the museum that takes up a whole block in Richmond. It said, on the evidence presented to us, we find the case has not been proven, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
If he had been found guilty, he would have hung by the neck. And you better believe that TJ, Thomas Jefferson, would have done it, carried it out.
Oh, yeah.
Years before his death, Aaron Burr, upon hearing of the Battle of the Alamo in Texas, said, "Isn't that something? What I did was called treason, and what Sam Houston did was called manifest destiny." On the plus side of Aaron Burr, he was expanding the territories westward of the United States, which later got heralded, complimented as manifest destiny. You know that term in history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But on the other hand, he came very close to the edge because he did have some men with weapons, and he was ready, willing, and able to invade Mexico if the United States declared war on Spain, which we never did. And so he never invaded Mexico, but he and General Wilkinson, the real traitor, the real rat, commander of the entire U.S. Army, who was in the secret pay of Spain as agent number 13, but that didn't come out for 30 years, and Burr didn't know it.
Wait, are you saying that Wilkinson was working for Spain?
Oh, yeah. That is a given. No one knew it at the time. Wilkinson, an extreme alcoholic who married into a very, very prominent family in Philadelphia, is the same family that Benedict Arnold married into. General Wilkinson was a real scoundrel, a real rat, a scoundrel. And all the time that he was working with Aaron Burr to test the loyalties of the fringe territories of Tennessee, Kentucky, Ohio, all the time that Aaron Burr was testing the loyalties of those areas, some for selfish reasons. He didn't know that his co-planner, General Wilkinson, was secretly in the pay of Spain.
To me, the public perception about Aaron Burr is the duel. And I, at least my posit that I had in the episode about him that I did was that no. He did a whole lot of other crazy stuff. I mean, this guy was just out for himself. He was just crazy. He was this and this and this. But then I wrote to you about it, and you actually wrote me back and said, listen, here is this laundry list of all these other things that Aaron Burr did. So what, to your mind, should we remember Aaron Burr for? So
Aaron Burr lived 80 years, which was a long time in those days. During those 80 years, there were many, many interesting, fascinating phases of Burr's life. It would take hours to tell them all, but let me give you a summary of the most positive things that he should be known for by the public. He was a progressive. Now, by that, of course, I mean he recognized the rights of women, Native Americans, African Americans, and the common man. Now, let me give you some examples. And this was almost unheard of in those days. Don't forget, we're talking about Burr died in 1836. When Burr had his mansion at Richmond Hill in Manhattan, he had lavish dinner parties, like most of the aristocrats did. And he invited Native American leaders like Joseph Pierce of New York's tribe, and he invited Black leaders to his party. That was considered by the other aristocrats as a no-no. It really was. They didn't like that. Burr was not a snob. He was a man of the people. He also was a leading advocate of women's education and rights. he trained his daughter, Theodosia, to be one of the most highly educated women in America. She spoke 4 foreign languages. Burr was also a patriot. That's a whole new area of his life. He was a member of a very wealthy family. His maternal grandfather was Jonathan Edwards, the fire and brimstone famous preacher. His father was second president of what became Princeton University. Burr, at the age of 19, went to Boston and signed up for Benedict Arnold's march to Quebec, which was a disaster. They had to eat the shoe leather of their shoes not to starve to death. Burr survived that battle. He was in the Battle of Long Island, also known as the Battle of Brooklyn, where he saved Alexander Hamilton, by the way. As the British were slaughtering our forces in Brooklyn and Long Island, a thick fog developed that allowed Aaron to lead Alexander Hamilton and others safely back to New York City. He was in the Battle of Monmouth, New Jersey. And finally, when General Washington was experiencing mutinies of our troops in Valley Forge and the place below it called the Ghent, Ghent. And the reason our soldiers were mutinying is they weren't being paid by Congress and they were starving and they weren't getting their pay. So Washington sent Burr there to instill discipline in the troops, and he did so with a sword. Then he became a leading lawyer in our new country. That's a whole new phase of his life. Then he became a member of the legislature of New York, where he introduced, among other things, anti-slavery legislation, but it was too radical. It called for the end of slavery totally, and New York was not ready for that. Burr reintroduced more gradual abolition legislation that was passed. Then he became Attorney General of New York. Then he was a U.S. Senator from New York, defeating Hamilton's father-in-law, General Schuyler, which really angered Alexander Hamilton. Then he became Vice President under Jefferson, was a patron of the arts. He paid for the education of John Vanderlyn, the famous portrait and landscape artist from upstate New York. So he had so many different phases of his life that are admirable.
So I think if anybody's looking, if we're looking back at Aaron Burr from a historical perspective, it's too reductive to say this is the guy who shot Alexander Hamilton. And probably for my supposition in my podcast episode, or in my episode, that he was also treasonous and, maybe a little crazy and power mad. That's probably an unfair position as well, at least from a overall summation of the man's life. Is that what I take you to say?
Well, like I say, to be honest and to be fair, Burr did cross the line in some areas. Yeah. He was a bit full of himself. He was a womanizer, which is not a good thing. He did want to set himself up as perhaps the head of Mexico if we had declared war on Spain. So he did do some things that I, as a lawyer, would have never advised him to do. So I want to be balanced.
Well, it sounds to me like I have been a little reductive to Mr. Burr, and maybe we've given him short shrift in history, and I appreciate you taking the time to help us correct the record today. I think I got it wrong. Thank you so much, Stuart Johnson, for being with me on American Esoterica. I appreciate your time here, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Just to give a few more cleanup notes over the last couple of years, these are the typos, if you will. I once referred to Secretary of War Edwin Stanton as Edward. Famous NASCAR driver Sterling Marlin accidentally became a member of the Martin family on my watch. Sorry about that. And finally, the mistake I've made over and over again since the very first episode. The word Esoterica is pronounced with an S sound, but I've been dropping in a harder Z sound this whole time. Look, it just sounds better the way I do it, and it's my show. The hard Z sound stays. I'm not sorry, even though I got it wrong. This has been American Esoterica. All sounds were made by me, Brian Powers, and my special guest today, Mr. Stuart Fisk Johnson, Esquire, of the Aaron Burr Association. Did I get it wrong? Did I get it right? Just want to point out that those questions are redundant in this episode? Drop me a note. The address is yell@americanesoterica.com. More information on the Aaron Burr Association can be found at aaronburrassociation.org. More information on this show and its episodes can be found at americanesoterica.com. Special thanks to Stuart Fisk Johnson and the Aaron Burr Association. Thank you for listening, and God bless America.